We laughed at the warning about human ships. I want you to know that I laughed too, that I was one of the ones who mocked it, who repeated the joke, who thought the whole reputation was sentimental nonsense dreamed up by weak peoples to comfort themselves. I laughed at the warning right up until the day a human ship was the only thing in the universe between me and death, and it came for me, and it saved me, and it did not even hold against me the fact that I had spent my life mocking everything it was. I'm telling you this as a confession, because I owe them that, and because the warning was true, and I am one of the very few who mocked it and lived to understand it. Let me tell you what the warning actually was, because everyone gets it wrong, including the version I used to laugh at. My name, it doesn't translate well, so call me Serel. I was a ship's officer, of a species and a navy that prided itself on cold competence, on efficiency, on the clear hard logic of survival in a dangerous galaxy. We were not cruel exactly. We were practical. And practicality, in our understanding, was the highest virtue a spacefaring people could have, because space is unforgiving and sentiment gets you killed, and we look down, all of us, the whole cold, competent lot of us, on any people foolish enough to let feeling override survival. I want to give you a picture of how we actually were, because cold and practical is just words until you see it lived. On my ship, the rule we were proudest of, the one drilled into every officer, was this: the ship comes first, and the mission comes before the ship, and no individual comes before either. We trained for the loss of crew the way other peoples train for victory, calmly, as an expected cost. If a section was breached, you sealed it, and if there were people in it, you sealed it anyway, because the alternative was risking the ship for the few, and the math was the math. We did not consider this cruel. We considered it mature, the hard wisdom of a people who had looked the universe in the face and accepted its terms. Younger officers who hesitated to make the cold call were corrected, gently, the way you correct a child who hasn't yet learned that the stove is hot. By the time you were a senior officer like me, the coldness wasn't an effort anymore. It was simply how you saw. A crewman in a doomed section was already, in your mind, a casualty, and you allocated your attention to the survivable, and you felt that this clarity was a kind of strength. I remember the specific evening I mocked the warning most cuttingly, because I've had a great deal of time to remember it since, and it shames me more than almost anything. We were in a port, a mixed crew of practical peoples, trading the usual gossip, and someone brought up the human reputation. The warning, the one about human ships not abandoning anyone. And there was a young officer at the table, not of my people, who said quietly that he didn't think it was funny, that he'd seen a human ship do the thing the warning described, and it had changed how he thought about a lot of things. And I, competent, senior, certain, I took that young officer apart in front of everyone. I explained to him, with the patient contempt of a man explaining the obvious, exactly why the human trait was a weakness and not a virtue, exactly how a sentimental people would always lose to a practical one, exactly why his being moved by a human ship's foolishness was itself a kind of weakness he should train out of himself if he wanted to survive. I was clever about it. People laughed. The young officer went quiet and didn't bring it up again. And I felt, walking back to my ship that night, the satisfaction of a man who had defended hard truth against soft sentiment. That was who I was. Remember him, that satisfied, clever, cold man, because he is the one a human ship was about to come and save. And there was, circulating in the galaxy, a warning about human ships. You heard it in ports, in the gossip of crews, in the careful briefings of the more superstitious navies. It was not the warning you'd expect. It did not say human ships were powerful. Humans were a middling people militarily, their ships no match for the great navies, and everyone knew it. The warning was stranger than that, and that's why we mocked it. The warning said, in its various forms, do not rely on a human ship to behave sensibly. Do not assume a human ship will act in its own interest. A human ship will not abandon. It will not leave its people or strangers or even enemies to die if it can prevent it. It will throw away every advantage, risk everything, destroy itself if it must, rather than leave someone behind. You cannot predict them, because they do not calculate the way sane peoples calculate. Do not get between a human ship and someone it has decided to save. And we laughed. Of course we laughed. To a cold, practical people, that warning didn't describe a threat, it described a weakness, the most exploitable weakness imaginable. A ship that won't abandon its people, that will throw away its own survival for sentiment. That is not frightening. That is foolish, and foolishness is something you use against an enemy, not something you fear. We had 100 jokes about it. We said human ships were run by feelings instead of officers. We said you could beat a human fleet by threatening a single life pod, because they'd ruin their whole strategy to save it. We said the humans would go extinct the first time the galaxy got serious, because a people that won't sacrifice the few for the many can't survive a hard universe. We were so sure. We were so very sure that the thing the warning described was a weakness, because in our whole understanding of how the universe worked, it could not be anything else. I have to make you understand how deep that certainty went, because the depth of it is the measure of how completely I was wrong. It was not that we hadn't thought about the human trait. We had thought about it a great deal, the way you analyze any enemy's weakness, and we had concluded with rigorous cold logic that it was the Achilles heel of the entire human species, that this refusal to abandon, this inability to cut their losses, was the flaw that made them, for all their cleverness, fundamentally unserious as a galactic power. A people who would not leave their wounded behind would always be slowed by their wounded. A people who would not sacrifice a ship to save a fleet would always lose the fleet. A people who would not abandon even their enemies. And the warning said that too, that humans would save an enemy in distress, which to us was simply incomprehensible, the act of a species that had not yet learned how the universe worked. Such a people was sentimental to the point of suicide, and we expected, genuinely, to watch them die of it someday. And we had what we thought was proof. That's the thing about a wrong certainty, it collects evidence for itself and is blind to evidence against. There had been incidents, known ones, that we passed around as confirmation. A human ship that had ruined a tactical position to recover a single-stranded crewman and been mauled for it, weakness. A human convoy that had slowed itself to the pace of its most damaged vessel rather than leave it, and lost ships it could have saved by cutting the cripple loose, foolishness, exactly as we said. A human captain who had accepted terrible losses to evacuate a population that wasn't even human, a people of no strategic value, purely because they were in danger, sentiment to the point of madness. We cataloged these stories the way you catalog an enemy's defeats, and every one of them confirmed our certainty that the human refusal to abandon was a fatal flaw, and not one of us ever turned the catalog over and asked the other question, the question that would have saved us our arrogance, which was, and yet they are still here, after all of it. After every loss this supposed weakness has cost them, the humans are still here, still spreading, still a people. How? If it is truly a fatal flaw, why has it not killed them? What if we have been reading the whole catalog backwards? We never asked. We were too certain. We had decided what the evidence meant before we looked at it, which is the most dangerous thing a clever people can do, and we did it about the one trait that was eventually going to humble every one of us. That was what I believed. Flying my cold, efficient ship through a cold, efficient galaxy. The day everything I believed was disproved in the only way that could ever have reached me, which was personally, at the moment of my own death. Because we got into trouble. The specifics don't matter much. A disaster, the kind space deals out to everyone eventually, no matter how competent. A cascade of failures that left my ship crippled and dying in a remote place. Our power failing, our air going, our distress calls going out into the dark with no one near enough to answer in time. I'll tell you a little of how it felt, though, because I had spent a career treating disasters as problems on a board, and I had never once been inside one as a man who might die. It is not like the drills. The drills are clean. You run the procedure and the procedure works or it doesn't, and either way you stay calm because calm is trained into you. The real thing is not clean. The real thing is the lights failing in stages, and the cold coming in slow and patient through a hull that has stopped fighting it, and the particular silence of systems that are supposed to hum and have stopped humming, and the way your own competent training keeps offering you procedures that no longer apply because the ship is too broken for them. I gave orders at first, good ones, the right ones, and watched them not be enough, one after another, and felt the strange vertigo of a man whose whole identity is competence discovering that competence has a floor under which it simply does not reach. We did everything right. That's the thing I keep coming back to. We were not destroyed by incompetence. We did everything our cold, excellent training told us to do flawlessly, and it was not enough, because sometimes the universe deals you a thing that no amount of doing it right can answer, and then you are simply a creature in the cold, waiting, like any other creature, for help that the wise do not send. And here is the thing about a cold, practical galaxy that I had never had to learn until that moment. When you are dying and useless in a remote place, the cold, practical peoples do not come for you. Why would they? It's not efficient. The calculus that we were all so proud of, the hard logic of survival, says that you do not risk a functioning ship to save a crippled one. Do not spend resources on the certainly doomed. Do not let sentiment override survival. Several ships heard our distress call. I know they heard it. They were the sensible peoples, the practical ones, my own kind of people, and they did the sensible thing, the practical thing, the thing I myself would have done a week earlier without a second thought. They calculated the risk, found it poor, and continued on their way, and left us to die, because that is what cold, competent logic tells you to do, and we had all agreed our whole lives that cold, competent logic was the highest wisdom. I have to tell you what that was like from the inside, because it is a thing I had inflicted on others without ever imagining it would be inflicted on me. We could hear them. That was the worst part. Our communication still worked even as the rest of the ship died around us, and we could hear the other ships in the region acknowledge our distress call, the cool professional voices, the brief pauses while they ran the same calculation I had run 100 times, and then the responses, polite and final, regret that they were unable to assist, advice to continue broadcasting, the verbal shrug of practical people declining an unprofitable risk. One of them was of my own species. I will never forget that. A ship of my own people heard us dying and did the mature thing, the wise thing, the thing our whole culture was built to do, and left us. And I could not even be angry because I knew that voice, I had been that voice. I would have made the same call and called it wisdom. I lay in my dying ship and listened to my own philosophy answer my distress call and decline it. And I began, for the first time in my life, to wonder if the thing we had all been so proud of was as wise as we thought, because it had just looked at me, dying, and calculated that I was not worth the risk, and gone on. And that is what it had always done to everyone, and I had cheered it. We stopped broadcasting after a while, most of us. There didn't seem to be a point. We sealed ourselves into the parts of the ship that still held air, and we waited, the way practical people wait for an end they've calculated and accepted. And some of my crew made their peace in the quiet, competent way we were trained to, and I tried to, and couldn't quite, because a question had gotten into me and wouldn't leave. Is this it? Is this what we built? A galaxy where the wise thing is to let each other die, and we all agreed to call it strength. There was a young crewman near me in the dark, one of the ones I'd have called soft once, the kind who felt things too openly for an officer's taste, and he was frightened, the way it's natural to be frightened, and he did a thing that has stayed with me. He didn't recite the calm acceptances we were trained in. He talked quietly about his home, about people he loved, about small, ordinary things he was going to miss, and he wasn't ashamed of it. And another crewman near him answered gently, and the two of them sat in the cold and the dark of a dying ship and were simply kind to each other, two creatures keeping each other company at the end. and it was the least practical thing I had ever witnessed and the only thing in that whole dying ship that felt like it mattered. I watched them, and the question in me got sharper. Because here, at the end, when all the cold competence had run out and the wise calculation had delivered us exactly to the death it always delivers everyone to eventually, the only thing left that had any worth was the thing we'd spent our whole lives looking down on: the warmth, the refusal to face the dark alone, the choosing of each other over the cold. The practical had gotten us here, and it had nothing to offer us now that we were here. Only the soft thing did, only the thing I had mocked. And it was in the middle of that question, in the cold and the failing air, and the silence of a galaxy that had done to me exactly what I'd taught it to do, that the impossible thing happened. And then a human ship answered, and it was not close. And it was not large or powerful or under any obligation, and it knew because we were broadcasting our identification, and our identification marked us as exactly the kind of cold, practical people who mocked them. It knew we were not its friends, and it came anyway. It turned out of its way and burned everything it had to reach us. A small human ship racing toward a dying enemy across a distance that the sensible peoples had already measured and declined. And I sat in my failing ship listening to it come. And I did not understand, because nothing in my entire cold, competent universe had a place for what was happening. I want to tell you about the waiting, the hour or however long it was while it came, because it was the strangest hour of my life. At first I did not believe it. I assumed I had misheard, or that the human ship had misunderstood our situation and would recalculate and turn away once it understood the risk, the way any sane vessel would. I kept waiting for it to turn away. That was the thing my mind kept doing. It kept predicting the human ship would do the sensible thing, would come to its senses, would run the numbers and decline like everyone else, because I could not conceive of a ship that would run those numbers and come anyway. And it didn't turn away. We could track it barely on what instruments we had left, and it just kept coming, holding its burn past the point where any practical captain would have aborted, committing itself harder and harder to a rescue that made no sense, until I understood slowly, with a feeling I still don't have a good word for, that it was not going to turn away, that it had never been going to turn away. That the thing I had spent my life certain was a weakness was bearing down on my dying ship at full burn, and was not going to stop. And I was afraid, strangely, not of the human ship, but of what it meant, because if it actually came and saved us, then everything was different than I had believed, and a man does not easily survive the destruction of everything he has believed, even when that destruction arrives as his own rescue. I lay there and watched the foolish, sentimental thing I had mocked my whole life come for me across the dark, and I understood that I was about to be saved by my own philosophy's greatest enemy, and that I was going to have to live afterward with everything that meant. It was almost easier to die. That is a terrible thing to admit, but it is true. There was a moment when being rescued by a human ship frightened me more than the death I'd accepted, because the death only cost me my life, and the rescue was going to cost me my certainty, and I had built my whole self on that certainty, and it was burning toward me now at the head of a small human ship that did not know how to leave anyone behind. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what that human ship did when it reached us, and what it cost them, and what they said, and the thing I finally understood about the warning we had all mocked, lying in my dying ship watching the foolish sentimental weakness we'd laughed at turn out to be the only thing in the universe that came for me. That's the whole of the story, and I need you standing exactly here first. In a crippled ship in a remote dark, a cold, practical officer who had mocked human ships his whole life, abandoned to die by his own sensible kind, listening to the one ship in the galaxy that wouldn't leave him burning toward him out of the black. An enemy, coming to save an enemy, for no reason that made any sense to me at all. The first thing they said, when the human ship finally reached us and opened a channel, was not a demand or a negotiation or even a question about who we were. The first thing the human captain said, in a voice tired from the hard burn it had taken to reach us, was, "We've got you, hold on, we're not going anywhere without you." And I, who had mocked human ships my whole life, who had explained with such clever contempt why that exact sentiment was a weakness, I broke hearing it. Because no one had ever said that to me. In my whole cold, competent life, in my whole cold, competent galaxy, no one had ever said we're not going anywhere without you, and I had not known until I heard it that it was the thing every creature in the cold is most desperate to hear. They came in hard and fast and reckless by our standards. A practical rescue, if such a thing had ever happened, would have been careful, would have assessed, calculated, protected the rescuing ship's safety margins, refused any maneuver that risked the rescuer to save the rescued. The humans did none of that. They threw their ship alongside our dying one with a speed and a closeness that made my surviving crew flinch, that risked their own vessel badly, because every second mattered and they had decided we were worth the risk to their own safety. I watched them work through the channel, and it was the most reckless, least practical operation I had ever seen, and it was also the most skilled. That was the thing that broke another piece of my certainty, because I had assumed sentiment and competence were opposites, that a people ruled by feeling must be sloppy, and these humans were not sloppy. They were brilliant, and reckless at once, pouring all their considerable skill into a rescue that no cold calculation would ever have authorized. They were not foolish people doing a foolish thing badly. They were excellent people choosing, with full skill and full knowledge of the cost, to do the thing the calculation forbade. And it cost them. I need to be clear about that, because the cost is the whole point, the thing that makes what they did meaningful rather than just lucky. The hard burn to reach us had hurt their ship. They'd spent reserves they couldn't easily replace, pushed their drives past where you're supposed to push them, and they would limp afterward, vulnerable, in a galaxy where vulnerable ships get preyed upon. The reckless maneuver alongside us risked damage they couldn't afford. And taking us aboard, a whole crew of strangers, of enemies, of the cold, mocking kind of people who'd have left them to die without a thought, strained their supplies, their space, their air, everything, made their own situation harder and more dangerous in a dozen concrete ways. They knew all of this. That was what I couldn't get past watching them. They were not ignorant of the cost. They were a spacefaring people. They could run the same numbers we could. They knew exactly what saving us was going to cost them and exactly how little sense it made. And they did it anyway with their eyes open, fully aware because, and this is the thing, this is the whole thing, the cost was simply not the deciding factor for them. We were dying. They could help. For them, astonishingly, that was where the calculation ended. Not what will it cost us, just someone is dying and we can reach them. Everything else was details. When they brought me aboard their ship, I was barely conscious, and the first human face I saw was the captain's, and I did something I am not proud of and will never forget. I tried to explain. I tried in my failing voice to tell them who we were, that we were not their friends, that my people mocked theirs, that I personally had spent my career explaining why they were fools, that they had just wrecked their ship and endangered their crew to save someone who would never have done the same for them. I tried to give them the cold calculation, even then, even saved, because it was so deep in me that I thought they must have made a mistake, that if they only understood who they'd rescued they would regret it. And the captain listened to all of it, this tired human who had just burned everything to save me, and when I was done, it was a she said the thing that finished the destruction of everything I had been, and remade me, and is the reason I am telling you this now. She said, "I know who you are. We heard your identification before we turned. We knew you were the ones who laugh at us. It didn't change anything. We don't save people because they'd save us. We save people because they need saving. That's the whole of it. You don't have to have earned it, you just have to need it. You needed it. So here you are." And then she said one more thing, more quietly, almost to herself, the thing I have built the rest of my life around. The day we start checking whether someone deserves rescue before we give it is the day we stop being worth rescuing ourselves. I want you to understand what that did to me lying there, saved, undone. Because in 2 sentences this tired human had inverted my entire universe. My whole life I had believed that the human refusal to abandon was a weakness, a failure to make the hard calculation, a softness that would someday be their death. And here, finally, I understood that I had had it exactly backwards, the way my people had had the whole catalog backwards. It was not that the humans were too sentimental to make the calculation. It was that they had made a different calculation, a deeper one, and arrived at a conclusion my people were too cold to reach. That a galaxy in which everyone abandons everyone is a galaxy not worth surviving in, and that the refusal to abandon is not a weakness you carry despite the cost but a strength you maintain through the cost, the way you maintain anything precious, by paying for it. The humans were not failing to be practical. They had understood something about what makes survival worth it that my practical people had never even thought to ask, and they had organized their entire spacefaring existence around protecting it, and that choice, held against every cost, by a people who could absolutely run the numbers and chose to answer to something higher than the numbers, was not weakness. It was the strongest thing I had ever encountered. It had come for me across a dark that my own kind had abandoned me to. It had paid for me when no one else would. There is no weakness that does that. Only strength does that. I had been calling it weakness my whole life because I had never once been the one it came for. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what happened after, what became of me and of my certainty, and of the human ship that saved an enemy at such cost, and what I did with the rest of my life once I understood that the warning we had all mocked was the truest thing anyone ever said about the humans. And the best thing, that's the resolution, the whole of it, and I need you standing exactly here first. Aboard a human ship that had wrecked itself to save the people who laughed at it, hearing a tired human captain explain, without anger, that they save people because people need saving and for no other reason at all, and feeling my whole cold universe fall away, and something better and far more frightening take its place. They got us home. That part was not dramatic. In the end, it was just hard. A long limp through dangerous space in a wounded ship overloaded with rescued strangers. The humans rationing their own supplies thinner to feed us, standing watches they were too few to comfortably stand, nursing their damaged drives across a distance that frightened even them. They never once made us feel like a burden, though we were one, an enormous one, a whole enemy crew they'd endangered themselves to save and now had to keep alive all the way to safety. They shared what they had. They treated our wounded as carefully as their own. And when we finally reached a port where my people could take us off their hands, the human captain saw us off the way you'd see off guests, not prisoners, and asked nothing in return, no payment, no acknowledgement, no apology even, though I tried to give her all three. She just said she was glad we'd made it and meant it, and turned back to her wounded ship and her tired crew and the work of putting right everything that saving us had cost them. I never saw her again. I want to say that because the stories like to end with a reunion and life rarely obliges. I never saw the captain who saved me again, but I have spent every day since trying to deserve what she did, and that is its own kind of keeping faith. Because I did not go back to who I was, I couldn't. You cannot be saved like that, saved by the very thing you mocked, by an enemy who paid for you and asked nothing, who told you to your face that you didn't have to earn rescue. You only had to need it. You cannot be saved like that and go back to being the cold, clever man who explained why such rescues were weakness. That man died in the cold dark of his dying ship, and a different one was carried aboard the human vessel, and the different one is the one telling you this. I went back to my people changed, and I was not quiet about the change, the way I had once been so loud about my certainty. I told the story. I told it everywhere to anyone who would listen, the way I am telling it to you, not the mocking version, the true one. I told the cold, competent peoples that I had run the numbers my whole life, and the numbers had left me to die, and that the foolish, sentimental humans had thrown the numbers away and come for me, and that I had been wrong, completely and shamefully wrong, about which of those was strength and which was weakness. Some of them listened, not all. The certainty I had lived in is a comfortable one, and people do not give it up easily. I know because I held it so long myself. There were those who heard my story and explained to me, with exactly the patient contempt I had once used on a young officer, that I had simply gotten lucky, that one sentimental ship's recklessness proved nothing, that I had let a near-death experience soften my judgment. I understood them too well to be angry. I had been them, but there were others, and more of them than I expected, who heard the story and went quiet, the way that young officer had gone quiet at my table years before, the quiet of a person feeling a certainty crack. And I began to understand that this was how it spreads, how it had always spread, the thing the warning described. Not by humans conquering anyone. By humans saving someone who then could not stop telling the story, until the story did its slow work on a cold galaxy, one cracked certainty at a time. Because here is what I finally understood about the warning, the thing that is the whole point of everything I have told you. The warning was true. Every word of it was true. Human ships will not abandon anyone, not their own, not strangers, not even the enemies who mock them. They will throw away every advantage, risk everything, wreck themselves, to reach someone who needs reaching. All of that is exactly as true as the warning said. But the warning was given by frightened peoples as a thing to fear, a danger, a weakness to exploit, and that was the lie inside the true thing, the part every one of us got wrong, because it is not a weakness. It is the most powerful force I have ever encountered, and I encountered it from the inside of a dying ship. And I am alive to tell you that the thing the galaxy mocks about human ships is the best thing in the galaxy, and possibly the only thing in it worth surviving for. The cold, practical peoples were right about one thing. A galaxy runs on what its peoples will and won't do for each other. We just had the conclusion backwards. We thought the winning move was to abandon, to cut every loss, save yourself, let the doomed die and call it wisdom. And it does let you survive, that philosophy. It kept us alive for a long time. But it builds a galaxy that isn't worth the surviving, a cold place where every creature faces the dark alone, where help never comes, where the wise thing is always to let each other die. The humans understood that such survival is a kind of death, slower than the other kind but deeper, and they refused it. They decided that they would rather pay the terrible cost of not abandoning each other than live in the cheap safety of a galaxy where no one comes when you call. And it turned out, this is the part that still astonishes me, that the galaxy of people who won't abandon each other is not weaker than the cold one. It is stronger. Because of people who know, absolutely, that their ship will come for them, that they will never face the dark alone, will do braver things, go further, risk more, hold longer than any cold calculating people ever could, because they are not each fighting alone for themselves. They are each held by all the others, and a people who are all holding each other cannot be broken the way a people of isolated calculators can. People tell the story now the way the warning was always told. Aliens mocked the warning about human ships until they met one, and they hear it as a tale of comeuppance, of arrogant aliens learning to fear human power, of a mocked people revealing they were deadly all along. And every time I correct them because I am one of the aliens who mocked, and I am the one who met one, and it was nothing like that. We did not learn to fear them. We learned to be ashamed of ourselves, which is a far more useful thing. The human ship did not reveal a hidden weapon or a secret strength of arms. It revealed something we had been too cold to see, that the thing we had mocked as the human's great weakness was, in fact, the great strength of any people brave enough to choose it, the simple, costly, unbreakable refusal to leave each other in the dark. We met one, and the one that we met did not destroy us or conquer us or frighten us into respect. It saved us, the very ones who laughed at terrible cost, asking nothing, and in doing so it did what no weapon could ever have done. It made us want to be like them. I am old now, and I have spent my life telling this story, and I will tell you the last of it plainly, the thing I most need you to carry. The warning about human ships was never really a warning. It was the highest compliment one people can pay another, spoken by peoples too frightened to recognize what they were saying. They will not abandon anyone. We said it like a curse. It is the finest thing that has ever been said about anyone. And I learned it the only way my cold heart could ever have learned it, too late to deny it, in the dark, at the edge of death, watching the thing I had mocked my whole life burn toward me out of the black, refusing, as it always refuses, as it will always refuse, to leave even its enemy alone in the cold. They came for me. That is the whole of what I know now, the only wisdom I have to leave. In a galaxy that taught me to abandon, the people I mocked came for me. And the day I understood that was the first day of my real life, and I have spent it, every hour of it since, trying to become the kind of person who would have turned his ship around too.